Thank you for joining us on our third series in our Kino book series for 2015. We're glad for this presentation right now with the incomparable Anne Ishii and, yes, clap. Cue
I said clap.
Right, cue laughter. And also, just as incomparable as well, the great graphic designer Chip Kidd in the house as well. Thank you guys. Today we're doing a presentation on Massive. It's a new manga anthology that's focusing on gay manga, but not your typical gay manga. It's not yaoi, and it goes against the grain of what's considered a more popular strain of gay manga, internationally speaking. And you know, Anne, I have to ask, how did this project come about, actually?
This story is funny to me forever and ever, but you know, so I'm working with the incomparable book design hero, superstar Chip Kidd, and then one day after we kind of started doing our own thing, he was like, hey Anne, I have some stuff I really would like to try to figure out what it says. You know, it's in Japanese, it's manga, and I would love to know what it says. And then...
How long ago was that, actually?
That was like 10 years ago now? Well, no, you're right, it must be at least 12 because we're 2015 and that was like 2003, so 2004. And I open it and it's gay.
Just let me preface this real quickly by saying we met at Vertical. I was the art director, and they hired this completely insane, profane woman to be their, of all things, their public relations manager. And she would send out these PR notes about just laced with profanity. I mean, this is pre-Twitter, obviously. Anyway, then I had a personal sort of passion project I was starting called Batmanga, the secret history of Batman in Japan, I think for which I did an event here like a zillion years ago. And I got Anne to do the translation for me. So that was our first translation project. And then there was this manga artist named Gengoroh Tagame who I sort of found rather appealing, but I could only get his stuff over the web in Japanese. So I Xeroxed a couple of my favorite stories and asked Anne if she would bother to translate some of them.
I was only so happy to do this, but of course it was Gengoroh Tagame, so I think if you know his work, it's pretty crazy, and so now I'm thinking like, what do I do with this? This is crazy. And at that point, that's when we started working together on that specific line of manga, and then kept waiting and waiting for somebody to publish it in English, and it kept not happening. And then we encountered Graham Colbeans, the third editor of this anthology, who had independently wanted to interview a bunch of these gay Japanese artists himself. And I said, why don't we just do a book? Like, forget interviewing them, like, let's turn that into a bigger project. Chip and I are already, or Chip already has an extensive collection. I've already been looking at it vicariously for translation purposes, of course. And then it turned into this project, and this anthology is sort of the nexus of all those people and interests and years of.
But I should also say that the first book we did was called The Passion of Gengoroh Tagame. It was published by Picture Box, which was headed up by a guy named Dan Nadell, who was a real hero to us for publishing it. And we won't go into all of that, but he sort of, in his own way, took a risk to do it. It's not normally was his kind of thing. He was much more of like an art comics publisher. Really, really great taste. But he took a chance on this, and then, I don't know all the details, but then, not because of the passion of Gengoroh Tagame, but for other circumstances, Picture Box closed shop. And so, but the book did really well. They sold it out, and then we wanted to do an anthology. We wanted to take it to the next step and do an anthology because this, I mean, Tagame is really sort of the, how do you want to say? I mean, he's the godfather of this genre, and then these other guys were inspired by him basically to do their work.
Was it just as long to get the selection of artists together?
That selection process actually happened relatively quickly once we got the book deal and the interest from Tagame, who, you know, I would say half of the artists were already known figures in the game manga underworld, and by underworld I just mean the internet. But you know, we all know how to look for these things, and some of these places will remain unnamed because they're illegal scanlation forums. But so some of these names were already familiar to us, and then we spoke with Tagame, and I mean, his role in this book can't be overstated. He really either helped us to find these artists that we were already fans of, or introduced us to some of these artists we weren't aware of that he thought would be good representations of a more diverse kind of game manga.
And so from that, was there a large demographic that you discovered from, you know, looking into this as far as, you know, putting a book together? Or?
Yeah, actually, you know, I think I just take for granted that this is written by gay men, mainly for gay men, but that, of course, there are non-gay men, non-men people who...
women.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, people, yeah, all kinds of people. The reading demographic is really interesting. I will say, though, that I mean, there's a unified theme, unspoken maybe, in the artist demographic, which is pretty specific. I mean, it's, you know, men who are big, who all work in some capacity in like design or arts, and you know, so that's a common demographic.
Yeah, because I noticed that with the artistic style for most of the stories, it's atypical.
Right.
And
I just love too that there is such a thing as typical game manga, because I mean,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at what's considered more popular, especially when you brought up, you know, the demographic of women reading this, they tend to stray more towards yaoi because it has more feminine interests in mind. But this is very masculine. Even visually speaking, there's some very graphic things that are happening in there, which you don't really even touch upon with yaoi manga. Was there trepidation as far as like figuring out if the American audience would actually, because so far the book's been very successful, but was there any trepidation as far as like producing this together?
Well, personally, when Passion of Tagame was coming out, that came out in what, like March of that year, and then I had a children's book coming out in September. You know, totally different company, different thing, and I have to say, like, it scared me a little bit that somebody would sort of put these two things together and say, whoa, wait a minute, which has not happened. Both books have been very successful, but I remember the Tagame book was printed in Canada, and we had to send the printer, like, they basically said, all right, like, how crazy does this get? Right. So we had to send them some crazy pages of stuff. And but they obviously did it. So, but that there was this, and I very much wanted to put in Japanese what they call an obi on it, and basically, and then shrink wrap it. So you know, you couldn't casually flip through it, and it says very clearly for mature readers on the side. I mean, those were my basic concerns.
Well, I'll say the trepidation was, it's an interesting topic for a couple of reasons. One is, as far as the American publishers we've dealt with have been concerned, Picture Box and Fantagraphics, the only thing that we weren't allowed to print or run was anything that implied underage sex, which isn't as big or an issue really in Japanese comics.
Right.
But on the other hand, we were allowed to print anything under the sun that one could imagine completely uncensored. So as long as you're over 18, it was just anything. But so the interesting thing that's happened now is that there are Japanese consumers who are buying this book so that they can see these comics unadulterated for the first time ever.
You know, the one thing I seem to notice with it as well is how simplistic it is as far as like the design work. You didn't want to, you know, say like this is a Chip Kidd piece, obviously. In what way did you want to emphasize more of the story and the artist as well when designing it?
Well, I have to give a lot of the credit goes to Graham.
Yeah.
Because I had time to sort of do the cover and do what we call the front matter, which kind of takes you into
we know
the book.
what front matter is.
But which anyway is in the back in a Japanese book. And then I wrote a little essay, and then after that, Graham really had to bear the brunt of the heavy lifting, so to speak, of all the stuff inside. And there's he put together a timeline of Japanese gay art and literature that's truly impressive. I mean, to me, it's like worthy of a doctoral dissertation in that. If you like Japanese gay studies, it's amazing.